hour-long discussion on if werewolves and vampires are real. Right now, the first thing I want to talk about is werewolves versus dogman. Okay, so everybody says like werewolf this, werewolf that, and a lot of those reports I believe are attributed to what the phenomenon is dogman. And dogman is, I believe that dogman is not a flesh and bone creature. I think the difference between a werewolf and a dogman is that a dogman is more of like a spiritual entity. When you hear about people getting chased or pursued by what they describe as werewolves, but it never catches up to them, like it never, like it's always chasing them, but it never quite gets them, or it scares them really bad. I think dogman is what's known as a fear eater. And if you want to go down that rabbit hole, we did a whole different video on fear eaters one time. But dogman and werewolves would be similar to appearance, where dogman can be anything ranging from just, it looks like a dog on hind legs, to what you would think of as when you think of your typical werewolf type scenario. Arkansas, Oklahoma, Mississippi, Missouri, all those areas are very, very famous for dogman sightings. There's actually an Oklahoma dogman sighting that went on a big, heavy run back around 10 to 15 years ago. But the dogman theory has its own video that you guys can go and watch that we did. Just type in Nomad's Animal Encounter, dogman video, and we'll talk more about that. So werewolves, though, is what, when you're thinking of the wolf man or your classic werewolf, you might think of several different things. So werewolves are often depicted as either a man that just turns straight up into a wolf, kind of like on Twilight, when you see Jacob turn into a wolf. Fun little side fact, those were not werewolves in the Twilight movie. If you read the books, it talks about the other Native American clans could actually transform to different spirit animals. Like there was one Native American group that could turn into grizzly bears. Just Jacob's tribe happened to be the wolf, so they would transfer into wolves. So, fun fact, werewolves and vampires were not in Twilight, just vampires were, and then shapeshifters is what Jacob's people were. Weird side note, there's going to be a lot of pop culture references in this. There's the American Werewolf in London type deal, where a man turns into a what looks like a dog type deal. There's versions where these people can turn into werewolves at will. There's versions where they can only turn into them at the full moon. There's your your underworld thought when you think about vampires versus werewolves, like the Lycans, the big muscled up, vampires. That's what the modern vision of a vampire kind of is, on hind legs. So there's several different ways that people can look at it, but I like to think of the old classic Wolfman type deal. Now, where do werewolf stories originate from? Well, weirdly enough, werewolf stories are almost just as old as vampire stories. And we'll get to the vampire stuff in the latter half of this video. But a lot of origin stories of werewolves can be found in children's nursery rhymes. So have you ever heard of, the Three Little Pigs, little pig, let me in. And then he blows the stick house down and the straw house down, but he can't get into the stone house or the brick house. Those were true stories that were passed down to tell people, essentially, build your homes good, build your shelters good. Because back then, when we didn't have weapons and wolves were, running wild, doing what wolves do, babies would cry in the middle of the night, and wolves could smell them and they could get in through the windows. Because you got to think, now you have a pane glass window, which at the end of the day, a wolf could go through that if it wanted to. But wolves are always going to take the passive least resistance. Our homes also nowadays seal up our smells better than before. So back then, where most of the house was, pretty open air, smells from your home would go outside pretty easy. So wolves would come in through the windows, through the doorways. A lot of houses were made out of sticks or straw, and they could quite literally dig through the walls or the roof, and they'd steal babies. And that's not a myth or a legend. That we know that for a fact. So Three Little Pigs was originally about making your home strong and sturdy. That was your neat little nursery rhyme. Tons of nursery rhymes are rooted into really dark original things. Another nursery rhyme, Little Red Riding Hood, don't walk into the woods alone. That was essentially for kids saying hey, don't go, through the woods alone. But it was also a message for parents of don't send your kids on errands through the woods or around the wooded areas. So these stories of vampires and werewolves are really old. And one of the original werewolf stories was about a village where there was only a few sole survivors that made it to the neighboring towns and villages and were able to get a military troop together. Now, this story is not a isolated one-time story. This happened multiple times. But there was a huge wolf attack that happened in the middle of the day, where dozens of villagers were killed in broad daylight by a massive pack of wolves that numbered in the hundreds. Now, many of these villages didn't really even have like names like we would think of today, because these villages would be 4, 5, 6 houses. So, I mean, we're talking about, small groups of people that lived together, maybe 20 to 30 people max. Well, these wolf packs were, like I said, numbered in the hundreds, and they would just come take what they wanted. We didn't have weapons like we do today to fend them off. I mean, we just had swords or pitchforks, and a lot of people back then think everybody had a sword. Very, very few people had a sword back then. Most swords were rationed for the military, or you were like a noble family. So if you were defending your farm, you were using farm tools. You were using scythes or pitchforks or maybe an axe. You didn't have a sword. Okay, that wasn't like a normal thing for people to have. They're very expensive. So, like I said, these wolf packs would come and attack. And you guys, if you watch Mr. Ballin, you might have heard of some of these famous wolf stories, like the Beast of Govindot. The Beast of Govindot is a great story, Mr. Ballin, if you guys want to watch it. Talks about the real event that happened and a little boy who came face to face with one of these legendary wolves. And I think that over time, people thought these legendary wolves in these stories were werewolves. And who knows, they might have been. But like back then, wolves got stats like today. Like, how we keep track of like NBA players and NFL players and stuff. I just said NBA, MLB, NFL. We keep track of like players. Back then, they kept track of animal stats because there was multiple wolves that had names, and these wolves were accredited for dozens of kills. There was a female she-wolf in France that claimed the lives of an estimated 30-some-odd people by herself, not her pack. Her herself had been seen killing, mutilating, or maiming dozens and dozens of people. And she specifically would go after babies and children. And it didn't seem to matter if it was night or day. And she had a massive pack. And these people would describe the wolf. They would write it down. They would write about it in their like logs. You can look up like serious logs of French and German towns and the wolves that they were at battle with. So much that sometimes their kingdoms or villages or towns would declare literal war on wolf packs. But the Beast of Govindot is a really crazy story. Over the span of 3 years, more than 100 people were killed, with dozens and dozens more permanently injured or maimed from these wolf attacks. So, like I said, I think that somewhere along the line, people started telling these crazy stories, these legendary stories, as a pretty much like a way to talk about how scary these wolves are and kind of humanize it for themselves to cope with it, because that's what they're living with every day, is these wolves. Especially when back then religion was really huge. So would you want to say a creature that God made killed a bunch of babies and kids, or would you like to say that some kind of beast or a demon, something unnatural, killed these babies and kids and some grown men? So I think a lot of people, to cope with it, made these stories up, and over time they got infatuated. Now, could I be completely wrong? Could werewolves be legit? When I get to vampires, I'm going to tell you I think vampires are a legit thing. They might not be what we think they are, but I do think they're 100% real. Werewolves, I've never been a big believer on those, but Dogman, I'm a huge believer in that stuff. If you want my honest opinion, though, on the craziest wolf story that you can ever see, it's the Wolves of Paris. It happened 300 years before the story of the Beast of Govindot. The Wolves of Paris were led, like this sounds like something out of a movie or like an anime or something. The Wolves of Paris were led by a bob-tailed wolf, and it had its own name. The bobtailed wolf name was Chortad, and Chortad led a massive pack of wolves. This is Paris, by the way. I mean, a huge place. They set up tons of defenses to keep this massive pack of wolves out that they quite literally declared war on. Over the course of days, the wolves somehow breached the defenses. Yes, breached the defenses, meaning took out guards, climbed over stone fortifications walls, and made it into the town. The people then lured it. Like, they used meat and other sources to lure this massive pack to Notre Dame, where a militia had formed to hide in the buildings around Notre Dame. And when the packs of wolves went into the cathedral, they barricaded them in there and stoned and speared them to death. This is a true story you can look up and read. It's called The Wolves of Paris. It is a documented war with wolves in one of the most famous buildings in the world, the Notre Dame Cathedral. It just sounds something out of a fairy book. And that's why I think that over time, animals have changed on our planet. because I think that animals are way more sentient than we realize, and I think over time they recognize weapons, they recognize danger, and they mentally evolve to avoid people. Because you're talking about, this was a highly populated area, and they're just like, we're going in there. The only difference between back then and now is, one, there's nowhere near as many wolves, but the wolves that are still there, also I think they know, like, people are danger, people equals like death, we don't go there. It's just amazing to me how much crazy history is out there. And I wish so much they'd have taught us stuff like that in schools, because like that is how we forever changed our earth. And people don't realize, like, over time, animals and nature were a much bigger deal than today. Like today we have AC, we have heat. There's a heat wave coming through Oklahoma this upcoming week. And people are probably going to die from a heat stroke or heat exhaustion. It happens every year to a handful of people. But 100 years ago, this heat wave that's coming next week would have been like a traumatic wave that would have went through and killed a bunch of people, or people would have migrated north to avoid it. Like nature had a much bigger role in our day-to-day life back then than it does now, like by an extreme margin. And it's just crazy to think, like, all the different things that have changed, because like you read, the Bible has stories of grizzly bear attacks in broad daylight, killing a whole village. You hear about these wolves in Paris, and then you hear about like the early days of cavemen. Like, how did they even survive? Because they had, like, human beings, we have every disadvantage imaginable. Most animals in the animal world will body a human. I'm a zookeeper for a living. Me and my wife both are. We own a wildlife education facility. Most animals will kick your ass. And everybody thinks like, oh, I could beat a kangaroo. You could beat a juvenile kangaroo up. An adult kangaroo that's not domesticated is going to clean your clock, I promise you. They just don't want to in the wild. They just avoid you. A cow that you see in a pasture every day, if you had to fight a cow by hand, there's physically no way you could even win. Like, it's just, most people don't realize how much animals have an advantage over us in any fight. A monkey that's like a fifth of our size will destroy you, I promise. A baboon that weighs 40 pounds will kill you in 10 seconds. They've got big fangs, they'll go right for the throat. They just have a different brutality than humans in general have. Now, we know that sometimes there are freak animals, and maybe those freak animals were responsible for the Beast of Govindot and for the Wolves of Paris. If you don't know what I'm talking about, once again, search When Darkness Falls, or search Nomad's Animal Encounter. It talks about lion attacks. We did a whole video about these male lions that had to be hunted down in the late 1800s, I believe. It might have been early 1900s. It's not off the rip for me. And these two male lions that were maneless, by the way, were about 30% larger than normal lions are. Their brain showed that the part of their brain that makes them aggressive was also much larger. And they killed over an estimated 150 to 200 people that were working on the railroads. Two lions did all that damage. And these people would set up traps for them and all this different stuff, and they were so smart they would avoid them. And it took like an actual member of the military going out on a paid expedition to hunt these lions. And now they're, I believe they're at the Chicago Museum of History. You can go see their taxidermied bodies. But they were also white in color almost. And they were a mutated, freak of nature. Like, no one really knows why they were like that. So maybe that's what happened in the past here. So now we know that animals do evolve over time with their intelligence and what they accept and don't accept. Like I said earlier, we study animals for a living. We work with animals for a living. Prairie dogs and coyotes are the only two known animals that naturally, without ever have seen a gun before, will know what that is. So if a prairie dog has never seen one before in its entire life, and somebody goes out there, with a gun in their hand, a prairie dog will immediately know what that is, and they will hide. They are innately born knowing what that is. And signs are start showing. I shouldn't have said proven earlier. The studies believe that coyotes are now to that same point, because if you guys didn't know, coyote hunting is one of the most pointless things you can do. Coyotes have a really crazy behavior. So they can only breed like once a year, coyotes can. But if a lot of coyote numbers go down in the area, all the mother coyotes that are still left, which everybody says, oh yeah, if you get all the females, you don't have to worry about it. You're never going to get them all. They're like mice. Where you find one, there's going to be a bunch more. And the females, when the coyote numbers are low, their next litter will have way more coyote pups born. And those coyote pups will be genetically better than the previous coyotes because they're going to have less competition for the food in the area. So they're going to eat better than the other coyotes, and they're going to naturally be bigger on their own. So like when coyote populations get decimated down to almost nothing, the next time coyotes populate that area, the coyotes are up to 10% bigger than previous coyotes had been in that area. Like I said, coyote hunting is one of the most pointless things you can ever do. I get coyote defending. You got to defend your property. At the end of the day, they were there first. Moving on. People always hate me when I say that. It is what it is. So we know that prairie dogs and coyotes recognize it without ever seeing it. So I think that a lot of more animals do recognize the sense of at least danger. They might not recognize the weapon, but they sense danger. And ask yourself this. A lot of deer hunters watch my page here. And I used to deer hunt all the time myself when I was younger. How many times have you gone deer hunting and you see nothing? And then you go deer hunt, like you go just walking through the woods and you see daggum Bambi almost walks up to you, right? They can prove that this is a real thing. This part is not a myth. When you have an intent to do harm, you give off a certain pheromone. And that pheromone can be smelled by tons of different things out there. So a lot of people don't even realize this is a factor because we can't smell it. But animals can certainly smell it. And a lot of communication that animals have amongst each other when they're just staring at each other and they're communicating is pheromone release, because a lot of animals can control pheromone release. If you ever want to go down the rabbit hole of pheromone study, it is wild. So if you ever watch like TV shows or animes where they're like, oh, I can sense the intent to kill, that is a real thing on a certain level that you can, have you ever got like a gut feeling when you're next to someone that like, you're like, oh, this person's trouble. And then you go find out that they were trouble. Or you get like this bad feeling that you need to leave an area. That's your gut telling you something. Well, your gut is subconsciously smelling that pheromone on a subconscious level, most likely. And we give that thing off, there's more than just that though. Like, for example, this is really weird. If a man and a woman or, whoever, if somebody has sex, a pheromone is released. And if you leave, say if a husband and wife have sex and then the husband goes out in town, women will find him more attractive for up to 2 hours because there is a subconscious reading of that pheromone that is coming from about his chest area. And it's the same way. If the woman leaves the house, men will find her more attractive on a subconscious level because the pheromone releases. So it is a weird thing. Pheromones are a very weird thing. But maybe they sense like, oh, they are more dangerous, or oh, they have the intentions to do this, or oh, that is what could happen. And we have to wonder on what level are they truly understanding the world around them. Now, the thing I want to talk about that ties in werewolves with my vampire talk that I'm about to do is containment theory. So containment theory is pretty much the belief that I'm going to talk about this on the U.S. level, but it exists on all levels too. The U.S. government has designated national parks, right, where you can't build cities and towns, and some of these areas are no light zones, and some of these areas are like quiet zones and stuff. And there's a belief out there called containment theory that the reason why we designated certain areas as national parks is because we know this other intelligent race of either werewolf or vampire, possibly both, exist, and we're giving them a place to hunt and feed. And that's kind of our agreement of like, hey, we'll let some travelers through these areas. Every once in a while you can take a couple. Just don't make a habit out of it. This ties into the missing 411 phenomenon, but we'll get into that in a minute. The reason why I say, like, everybody's always like, oh, national parks are because there's beautiful things there. Our whole country was a national park at one time. So why did we designate certain areas as national park zones? If you look at national park zones, almost all of them are on giant cave systems, which is super weird. There is almost no giant cave system in America that is not labeled a national park zone. Pretty much every massive cave system is underneath a national park zone, which has led a lot of people to believe is that where they're living or retreating to or hiding in. And there is some caves in the United States you're not allowed to go unless you have certain licensing or whatever. And then some caves you're not allowed to go, period. So maybe at some point there was a treaty between intelligent beings and intelligent races of like, hey, if you don't want us hunting the cities and everywhere else, we get to hunt these certain areas. And these are technically our designated hunting zones. Because there's no light zones in certain national parks where even rescue crews, like if you go missing in a no light zone, even a rescue crew has to get permission to go in there with lights to look for you. So like, what are they so worried about? If it's a life and death situation, what are they worried about saving you? And some people go, oh, it's for the bats. Some of these no light zones have nothing to do with bats. I've looked into it. Some of it says, oh, so you can see the stars. Like, oh, so somebody can see the stars is more important than a rescue crew has to go save, Jimmy John over here that fell off a cliff or something. Like, what are you worried you're going to stir up or see or attract? Getting into the containment theory side of things, people talk about there's portals in the national parks. Maybe that's how they come and go from our dimension to wherever they're from, or that's a way they can kind of fast travel. Who knows? But the missing 411 phenomenon, if you don't even know what I'm talking about, is the strange, mysterious disappearances in the national parks. A lot of these are normal that go missing in the national parks. That's not a missing 411 case. Missing 411 cases revolve around people that go missing when they're mostly with a group of people and there's no explanation for them to be gone. Like they just didn't look at, Joe over there for 10 seconds and Joe's gone forever. Sometimes these people are found later, but they don't remember being gone, or it seems like they were gone for a very short amount of time when they were actually gone for days. Sometimes they're not found, but their stuff is found in a previous area that had been searched heavily, or where they even originally went missing from in the first place. There's so many. A lot of these revolve kids, which goes back to the wolves we were talking about. They would normally attack wolves and children. But a lot of these missing 411 cases, the dogs that come out to help find them can't even find scent trails, or the scent trails stop abruptly nowhere near water, or their footprints stop abruptly, and it's like they were just picked up into the sky. And we talked a little bit about that in our Bigfoot theory stuff the other day. I'm thinking that all of this stuff can be designated for the national park system to be their safe haven areas. Almost kind of like when you watch Hotel Transylvania. There's a hotel, it's an animated movie. There's a hotel, and that hotel is safe for all the different types of monsters to go. Maybe that's the safe zone there. That would also explain why there's not hunting allowed in these national parks and everything without special permits and licensing, because maybe at the end of the day, they don't want you accidentally shooting one of these werewolves, one of these Bigfoot, one of these vampires, whatever. So let's go forward. Let's get into the vampire stuff. First and foremost, when I want to talk about vampires, I want to talk about the two different popular kinds. There's the main ones that, are like your typical Dracula. They suck your blood. They stay young forever. You think about it when you watch Twilight and shit. The other kind is energy vampires, which are mainly a joke now because of what we do in the shadows with Colin Robinson and all that stuff. But energy vampires, the theory of energy vampires has been around for a long time. And that's the idea that they feed off of your fear, kind of like what we said at the very beginning. The fear eaters. It's the same principle. They feed off your fear. They feed off your negative thoughts. So they feed off any kind of emotions, really. And jumping back to the fear eaters thing real quick, told you I'd reference a lot of pop culture stuff in here. Monsters, Inc. is pretty much fear eaters right in your face. So, Monsters, Inc., they scare the kids to get the emotion and get the fear from them. And they can use that fear to power themselves. It's like their life force, essentially. So that's what a fear eater is. And the energy vampire is kind of like that. But it doesn't have to be fear. It can be any sense of dread, anxiety, fear, what have you, sadness. They feed off the negative stuff. There's theories out there that they can feed off the positive stuff too, and any type of heightened emotions is what they can feed off of, and that's why a lot of vampires are very, very sexual. So that's out there too. There are other types of vampires, though. There's like a monstrous type of vampire, which is quite literally almost like a man-bat. There is your like Nosferatu, like really creepy looking. They're not like pretty vampires like a lot of vampires are made out to be. They're like your demonic looking, gremlin looking vampires, and that to me would be the scariest kind. There's your almost zombie-like vampires, which are almost like a ghoul. And then there's your, very fast ones, which are like your modern ones that we always think of, too, that are like in Twilight and Vampire Diaries and True Blood and all that stuff. So the thing with vampires that might be real, might not be real, is a lot of people say that many of our world leaders are those vampires, actually. And that's why you'll see, we did a video one time, if you want to type in Nomads, Animal Encounter, Immortal Celebrities. So we did a video one time about how like people like, and this is going to sound funny, but people like Jack Black and Keanu Reeves and Eddie Murphy and Jay-Z and Sylvester Stallone and the guy who made Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg. If you look through history, there are so many times, or you can just Google photos of this, so many times where it looks like modern day people that we know lived in the past and they've always been prominent figures. And there might be a cycle that they're on where they let themselves age and then they do their little, they might die out in the public eye or fade away from the public eye. Then they do their little ritual and they're young again. So that's where that theory is coming into pop culture now. But the stories of vampires have started for a long time. And there's a few different origin stories here that I could find. But the origin story that I like the most is that one of the soldiers that stabbed Jesus while he was on the cross, a speck of his blood landed on the Roman soldier's lips. And the next day he woke up, or the next night he woke up thirsting for human flesh and became the first vampire. And there's many other stories about vampires. There's stories of vampires that are older than Christianity even is. So a side note here to point out for the werewolves and vampires. So many cultures never spoke to each other, obviously, because oceans were in the way. And at the same time, they all had the same stories about vampires and werewolves, which is, to me, really, like, or at least a very close variation. Like South America, North America, Asia, Japan, Africa, all these places, there was, like, little to no communication, but they had the same stories. And what's crazy is that it's that way for pretty much every major cryptid creature out there, whether it's Bigfoot or vampires or aliens. Like, it's weird that as human beings, we all made different languages, we all made different architecture, we all made, different religion and all this other stuff. But the two things we share in common is we all made pyramids in the same shape, lining up with the same stars. And we all talk about the same monsters, like the exact same ones. There's a few variations out there, but all the popular monsters are in every single culture before they should have even known each other existed. So, little side note there for you. But vampires also might not be, if I'm right about the celebrity thing and like political leader thing, they might not be the vampires we think of that are like the sexy vampires and they're running around, they're all fast and all this other stuff. They might just be doing literal like blood rituals, like what a lot of people thought that like adrenochrome is. And you always hear people talk about how Hillary Clinton and the Jeffrey Epstein Island was they were getting the kids to get adrenochrome. Which there we go again, that same concept of getting the kids and getting the children and the babies. If you don't know what adrenochrome is, if you have not heard that conspiracy theory, that is a whole rabbit hole in yourself you need to go down. But adrenochrome is, we know that a different chemical gets released into our blood when we're afraid. And it's supposed to be one of the most potent substances in the world, potent chemicals in the world. It's called adrenochrome. It's what you essentially feel when you get an adrenaline rush. And it gets into your blood whenever you're terrified or scared or you have any kind of heightened, like extreme fear emotion. Not extreme happy, but extreme fear. It's very important because, like I said earlier, I was talking about the fear eaters. Maybe they want you to be scared. So if they do ever attack you, you're going to taste better. So anyhow, it's like seasoning your meat beforehand. You got to, culinate it, whatever. I don't even think that's a word. Anyhow, marinate it. So if you want to go down the adrenochrome theory, that is too dark for me to put in this video. It will probably get flagged. This video will probably already get flagged. So whoever's listening out there, it's going to get flagged on TikTok if it gets flagged anywhere. TikTok hates our guts right now. I made a video the other day, and I'm pretty sure I was right on the money because it got like 1 million views within an hour. Within a few hours, and it got taken down, and TikTok literally said, like, they sent me messages like, do not talk about that ever again. Facebook, the video's still up if you guys want to go down that rabbit hole and search out that. So moving forward to the vampire stuff. Could they hunt the national parks? Could they be our world leaders? Could they be all in the same? Could it be just a blood ritual they're doing? And that was the purpose of the Jeffrey Epstein Island. That's why we saw no one getting in trouble over it. It's because that was their little honey hole of where they were getting what they needed from. We don't know. There's a lot of theories about that. In fact, the American Revolution against Britain might have been fought against what we would call a vampire. And this is going to sound crazy, I know, but hear me out. So Parothia is the name of the disease that many people accredit the lore of vampires coming from. And King George III, the guy who was in charge of Britain when we declared our independence and fought the British in the American Revolution, had Porphyria. So what does this disease do? It essentially makes you very, very allergic to sunlight, which means that you almost only come out at night or in dim lighting. And when you do come out, you are fully covered. And I mean fully covered because your skin can actually get blisters from just the mere exposure to sunlight. So it does make people irritable. I'd be irritable too if I could never go outside essentially during the day, especially back then before they had like modern electricity and you had to like walk around with a torch everywhere. That would suck. So he was accredited to having this. Other things it can make you do is it can give you red blemishes around the eyes, which gives you that crazy like look in your eye. Also, it makes your gums recede, so all of your teeth appear to be longer. So imagine this guy's the king of England whenever we were fighting for our independence. Why do we not learn this stuff in school? Why? Why do we not hear about this stuff? Okay, so of course that's a real disease. I'm not saying he was a vampire. I'm just saying like that's people back then believed people like this were vampires. So could you imagine George Washington and the other guys being like, oh my God, that guy's a vampire. Like, we got to get away from this dude. We got to start our own country. Like, we don't know what was being talked about in the inner circles, but we know that he had the disease that many people accredit vampire lore to coming from originally. It also makes you have an extreme iron deficiency, so you will even like to eat your foods like your meat's kind of raw because your body subconsciously craves blood. There you go. There it is. So this disease has been around for a long time. But throughout history, there is several historical figures who have had that disease. Do you think that's a coincidence? Because it was supposed to be a rare disease, but we've got several kings and world leaders that have had it within the last few hundred years. Did they get better at hiding it? Did they get better at getting supplements and blood? Because, back then everything was much harder to get a hold of. And so now they can just hide it better. Other people that had it were Mary, Queen of Scots, and Vincent van Gogh. We have the Mad King, King George III. That was literally his nickname, the Mad King. Mary, Queen of Scots, and then Vincent van Gogh, who cut off his own ear and, was crazy, essentially. This disease is also credited with making severe hallucinations and paranoia happen. So you can imagine the rumors that would surround the people that had this. So vampires, or at least vampire-like creatures, are mentioned in literally pretty much every religion or culture worldwide. Once again, going back to this, even though they didn't know each other or talk to each other, they have the same stories. And I actually did a whole hour-long video on religion the other day and how they almost all are saying the exact same things in different ways. This goes back to, in the original version of the Bible, there is something that they refer to as the Alaka. And it talks about them being essentially like bloodsuckers. And in modern versions of the Bible, like the King James Version, which I'll talk about heavily, is a huge disgrace. It's been very heavily edited. It was made by people who had a reason to change things for people to see things in their way of light. And King James was an awful, horrible person in his own right. He was a cruel individual. And that word alaka that was originally in the Bible later got changed to leeches, meaning blood, like blood-sucking leeches. And a lot of people are like, oh, that's okay. Every other culture is very clear on what alaka means and what it is. It is a demon-type entity that would work the way we describe, like a sexy woman vampire. They were almost like a succubus, but, a succubus attacks you in your dreams or when you're, like, in and out of going to sleep. This was something that would lure specifically a man away and you would use its looks and its temptation to lure you away somewhere quiet, and then it would feast upon your blood. It would either kill you or you'd lose so much blood you'd lose consciousness, and then you would wake up with very little memory of what happened. And of course you'd be sick and extremely weak, and then would often die later from the amount of blood loss. So there is something called the Alaka that was in the original Bible. Go down that rabbit hole of Alaka. If you guys like anime references, Hunter x Hunter, Kila's little sister that was like all crazy, her name is Alaka. So, and that has roots to what this word originally meant and what all other cultures still say it means. Now, ancient Greeks had Lamia, which was the cursed queen, and once again, she would feast upon specifically children, just like we talked about earlier. And Lamia was supposedly cursed by Zeus because Zeus, if everybody knows anything about Zeus is a hoe, and Zeus essentially had sex with everything that ever lived, if you read Greek mythology. Like, if something is mentioned in Greek mythology, it's only a matter of time before it has an encounter with Zeus, and it's going to be a sexual encounter, like without fail, every time. So Lamia is supposed to be this beautiful queen, and one of Zeus's wives, Hera, got jealous about the affair, and she killed all of her kids except for one. So then Lamia went crazy and turned into what we would call a vampire and started hunting other women's children. It's crazy. I know, it's wild. I know. And that's just the beginning. There are so many cultures and religions that have the same story, the same trope over and over and over and over about blood-sucking monsters, but they really like the kids. Like that, it's so weird going into the modern-day adrenochrome, myth. Not so much of a myth. The most documented, this is the most well-documented vampire story of all time. It happened in Europe. It was in 1726, and it was Arnold Paul. So this was documented by the government and the military and still exists in Serbia's official government documents. So 1726, Arnold Paul supposedly dies from a bad, horrific fall. Don't know what the dude was doing. Apparently he fell. He died. The villagers said, hey, we buried him. And then months later, they go months without seeing old Arnold because he's dead. And then months later, Arnold shows back up. He kills a villager. And then they bury that villager. And then a few days later, Arnold shows back up with that villager that he killed. They're both alive. And then they kill somebody. And this cycle repeats a lot. The official Serbia government was involved. They came out to do an investigation. And finally, they found they found this gravesite type makeshift area where Arnold and the other supposedly missing / murdered villagers were. And all of those murdered villagers appeared to have no composition. Their bellies appeared to be full, and all of them were covered in blood. That was in the official, medical's examiner's notes that still exist today. What in the hell was going, that is what multiple medical professionals came out, saw, wrote down, and they didn't go, these guys are vampires. They just wrote down what they saw. and that is cemented into history, and that is the like focal point of most vampire discussions, is that situation. Now, there's other situations that were rumored to have happened like that, like the original, Bloody Mary and all that other stuff. But Arnold Poole is the only one that is officially heavily documented by multiple sources in the military, the government, and the medical examiner's office. So 3 different sources all came out and claimed to have found the same thing. Not to mention the villagers were also saying it. We still do not have an official explanation for this. And it's not like we can look at the bodies now, because they burned them all afterwards. Now let's talk about Vlad the Impaler, because that one is a famous one. It has little to do with vampires, though, but it always gets thrown in the mix because of the famous movie that came out and then the famous book that was written in the late 1800s, Dracula. Now, the word Dracula literally comes from Dracul, which also can mean devil or dragon, depending on who you're asking. Now, Vlad's father, Vlad II, was a member of, like, the Dragon's Order. It was, like, some kind of, like, group they had. So that's where the surname of Dracul came from. So that's where Dracula came from, talking about Vlad the Impaler. Did he really impale thousands of people? Yes. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Vlad the Impaler was a real ruler. And to do psychological warfare, anytime he killed his enemies, he would put stakes out on the ground all around his castle and just impale bodies like shish kebabs. And there was quite literally, like, I don't know if you could imagine, thousands of bodies on spears like shish kebabs. As far as the eye can see, just thousands of dead bodies at different stages of decomposition. And he did this for psychological warfare. Imagine pulling up to that castle going like, am I going to be one of these bodies tomorrow? I want out of here. And, the smell was awful. And, his men aren't having to fight you where the smell is. They're up in the castle. They're shooting arrows down and throwing catapults at you while you're next to all these dead bodies having to try to fight him in his castle. And so the propaganda of him drinking blood and all this stuff, that was not real. The Saxons wanted to paint him in a bad picture, which, like, the thousands of people staked wasn't a bad enough picture. They made up pamphlets of him, like, drinking blood and doing all this crazy stuff because they were trying to rally people to join the cause to fight against him. So they made a lot of propaganda of him doing stuff that he actually didn't do. They made propaganda saying that he'd made deals with the devil, all this different stuff, which maybe he did. But we know that came out of a place of, like, they were purely making stuff up to try to get more people to rally against him. So a lot of the stories you hear about Vlad the Impaler and all the crazy stuff that he did, most of it is not true. A lot of it came from that book and, the modern movie that you've probably seen. But we just don't know how much of it was real and how much of it was myth. Pretty much the only thing we know that was real was the bodies on the stakes around, because that was documented by multiple areas and civilizations, and then himself documented doing that. So we know that happened. The rest is all hearsay. The next major story is Countess Elizabeth Bathory. And I actually have to apologize. I did a whole video about this woman one time, Countess Elizabeth Bathory. We actually don't know if it's true or not. So historians are split. They have searched the grounds and cannot find any, like, undocumented graves. So if she was killing this many servants and children, her servants were taking the bodies really far away. So, and that's believable. It really is. But Elizabeth Bathory was a duchess that supposedly her husband had died, and she wanted to remain looking young so she could retain her power and attract, a new young, duke. So she was experimenting with her servants and not killing them at first, but she would be like, oh, give me a little bit of blood. They'd take a little bit of blood from them. She would drink it. She'd put it on her food. She would mix it in her bath water, like just small amounts. And she started saying that she felt better when she did this, when she ingested their blood, and we know now that a lot of people are suffering from vitamin D deficiency, so she might have felt better because there's a lot of iron in blood. Or iron deficiencies, sorry. So anyhow, she started getting more greedy. So then she started killing some of these servants, because some of these servants were like slaves. No one was going to miss them. Some of them, no one was looking for these people. But then once she ran out of servants that were expendable, then she started going to the village, and she was getting poor people and poor kids. And then she thought, well, maybe I have to have pure blood. So then she started taking blood from noble girls. And that's when it crossed the line, and that's when it got reported, and that's when people started trying to do something about it. But because she was famous and because she was a royal, they could not kill her because it would look like they were admitting to her doing something wrong. So they just imprisoned her and made it seem like she was there on her own free will, even though we know she was being held captive, because they did not want to admit to the public that somebody in high power was doing these crazy, weird, kooky experiments on the general public, essentially. Reportedly, she killed more than 400 children and young adults. Officially, we actually don't know that now. And I did not know that at the time I made the video in the past. A lot of people attacked me, and I'm like, okay, chill out. She lived 700 years ago. My bad. So it's not like her family was beating down my door going, I can't believe you said that about Elizabeth. So, but it's still a historical inaccuracy that I might have made. I might not have made. I might be right on the money. Her servants might have taken those bodies far away, and maybe they were smart and they buried them in a nearby battlefield or something, and it just looked like they got mixed in with the rest of the bodies. Who knows? All of Europe, it was a battlefield at one time or another, so who knows what they did to those bodies. Maybe they buried them in other graves that were already buried, so no one's going to be looking there. We don't know. Which I've always thought that's the best place to hide a dead body, is just dig up somebody else's grave, put their body in there with them, and then rebury it. Because, no one's digging up Ethel to see if there's another body in her casket. Shouldn't have told some of y'all that probably. You guys are... I've learned I've got some sickos that are followers and some weird people. We love you being here. I just don't want you in my house. So, Elizabeth Bathory, the maybe not vampire, but the studies she was doing back then, we do know are real. We do know that there's elitists today that have blood boys, and if you don't know what blood boys is for rich people, that's another rabbit hole. I think I've given you at least 11 or 12 rabbit holes so far. So blood boys is when you have there's a dad and a son, and the son can transfuse blood to his dad, and the dad will actually start feeling younger and de-aging. We know it works. We've seen it, and we've tested it in mice, we've tested it in humans, we know it works. We know if you ingest or obtain the blood of a younger person, that an older person will start to feel and show signs of being younger. We know this. It's no longer a myth or a conspiracy or what would happen? We know. Now, the last story I'm going to leave you with is a modern vampire story. This was Mercy Brown, and this happened in 1892. This was one of the most recent vampire panics that has ever happened. So this happened in Exeter, Rhode Island, and you can actually still visit Mercy Brown's grave at Chestnut Hill in Exeter, Rhode Island. So Mercy Brown died in 1892. Shortly after, all of her family members and members of the town were dying. And almost every vampire lore outbreak has happened around a tuberculosis outbreak. So I don't know what to do with that information. I just know that every single time there's a giant vampire scare, and this was called the New England vampire scare of the 19th century. It was also one of the biggest tuberculosis outbreaks to ever happen in the United States. So those go hand in hand. So the death started happening right after Mercy Brown died, though. Now, we know that she was probably the original person that had it, and then she gave it to everybody else somehow. What the town believed, though, was that somebody is coming back to life that we've already buried, and they're killing everybody. So we got to dig up all the graves and figure out who did this. So they start with one of the first ones being Mercy Brown, because she was the first one to die of this outbreak. So when they dig her up, this has been months and months at this point, and this is before modern day embalming. And her body, and we still don't know why this is the case, but her body was almost perfectly preserved. It said that she looked like she hadn't even died at all, and they even said that her cheeks had a little pink to them, like there was still blood flow in her cheeks. Everybody was immediately freaked out, obviously, so they cut out Mercy Brown's heart. They ground it, ground it up, put it in some kind of elixir, and then spread the ashes of that over a cliffside. Go figure. And then they burned her body. So, and then the remainder of whatever's left of that heart. And then supposedly, this is weird too, because then the death stopped happening. Coincidence? Maybe. Weird? Definitely. I'm not going to go there in this video. We're going to do a whole nother video on tuberculosis outbreaks and vampirism, because, like I said, throughout history, they go like this. They're always together. Maybe they were onto something. Maybe they knew something we didn't. But I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. If you are watching us on any platform, follow us on Facebook primarily. It's Nomad's Animal Encounter. You can follow us on TikTok if you want. I'm just really upset with them. And then on YouTube, we are Nomad's Animal Reserve. And then our Spotify, that is really kicking off. And on Apple Podcast and Spotify, it's called Matt from Nomads. I would love to see you on any of those platforms. Thank you so much for sticking to the end of this video. If you aren't following me, I don't know why not. You listened to me talk for an hour. You clearly at least thought what I had to say was entertaining or interesting. See you next time. Also, if you didn't know it, I do stand-up comedy during the day. I do spooky stories at night. My next comedy show is in Tulsa, Oklahoma at the Looney Bin, and that's actually going to be September 23rd. You can follow those podcasts with the links in the comment section, or you can buy tickets to my comedy show with a link in the comment section. Thank you for sticking around, guys.